Okay, so this is Matt again with the Cook's Warehouse, and today our video is going to cover knife sharpening and knife maintenance. So essentially how to get your knives sharp and how to keep your knives sharp, which is obviously the most important thing that a knife can be, is sharp, because what good is a dull knife going to do you? And a dull knife is also a dangerous knife, because when you're using a dull knife in the kitchen, you have to use so much more pressure than you normally would that you're likely to slip and hurt yourself. So it may sound counterintuitive, but a sharp knife is actually the safest knife that you can have in your kitchen. So I'm going to go over a few tools and a few options for maintaining your knife's edge. The first I'd like to talk about is this. Now, contrary to popular belief, this is not a sharpener. This does not sharpen your knives. This is called a honing rod. And the difference between honing and sharpening is an important one. It's a subtle difference, but it's actually very important. So honing is actually a daily maintenance item, so you can hone your knives every time you use them if you would like. You should at least hone your knives every few times that you use them. And so what this does, if you imagine the edge of your knife under a microscope, and you imagine it as a very, very thin point and a very thin ridge, it looks almost like a hair. Over time, as you use your knife, parts of the edge are going to get bent out of alignment, they're going to get rolled over on themselves, and so the knife's not going to cut as well. What this does, and what a honing rod does, is it hones your knife, and honing actually brings all of those little peaks and valleys that you could see on a microscope that have gotten bent out of alignment or curled over on themselves, and it brings them back into a perfectly straight line. So honing, the difference between honing and sharpening is honing actually doesn't remove any material from your knife. So that's the key difference. So when you sharpen a knife, you're actually taking a little bit of the metal off to reform the edge. So we're going to talk about sharpening in a minute, but first I want to show you how to hone. I do this with my knives every time I put them away. I wash and dry them. You always want to wash them by hand. You never want to put knives in the dishwasher for a variety of reasons, but it's just very, very rough on your knife's edge. So I always wash my knives by hand. I hand dry them bone dry immediately, and I put them directly away right after I hone them a couple of times. So the easiest way, you've probably seen chefs hold these up in the air and go crazy with them. But for a home cook, the easiest way is actually to put a towel down and hold this vertically with the point down on the towel. Now what you're going to do is you're going to make about a 15 or 20 degree angle. And a good way to estimate that is start with a 90-degree angle, cut it in half, that's 45 degrees. Cut it in half, that's 22.5 degrees, and then just slightly less than that. And that's the angle that you're going for. All right, so with that angle in mind, what you're going to do is you're actually just going to put a little bit of pressure against the honing rod, and you're just going to pull the knife back. And you're going to do that on both sides. You're going to alternate sides just a few times. So 3 or 4 passes on each side, and that's it. That's all you need to do to hone your knife. All right, so next I want to talk about sharpening your knives. Now, you probably don't need to sharpen as often as you think you do. A really high quality knife that's well maintained, well taken care of. A stamped knife probably needs to be sharpened 3 or 4 times a year. A forged knife probably doesn't need to be sharpened more than maybe a couple times a year. So really you don't need to be sharpening your knives that often if you're honing them regularly and taking good care of them. There's a good test to tell if your knife is sharp enough, and that is after you've honed your knife, you take a piece of paper and you want to see if you can easily glide through this piece of paper. So as you can see, this knife is pretty sharp. It's really easy. The knife doesn't seem to be dragging. The cut is a little bit ragged if you're able to see it. So this knife is not quite as sharp as it could be, but it's still pretty sharp. So you shouldn't have any points along the edge of the knife where you feel the blade dragging. And so this knife actually does need a little touch up. So we're gonna do that today. But that just gives you a good test of whether your knives are sharp enough or not, or if you need to sharpen them. So next we're gonna talk about sharpening, what you need to do when you need to sharpen your blade. So the first option is a professional sharpening, just have us sharpen them for you. We offer professional knife sharpening for $6 a blade for straight blades and $8 a blade for serrated blades. You drop them off with us. If you drop them off by close of business on Monday, we'll give them back to you by Wednesday. So that's a great option, especially if you're only sharpening a couple times a year. If you're not with us here in Atlanta, find a local sharpener, or a lot of our manufacturers actually have a sharpening program. For instance, Shun, if you buy a Shun knife, you get free sharpening for a lifetime at the factory. You just cover the cost of shipping. You send it to their factory on the West Coast, and they send it right back to you sharp as new. And even if you've chipped your blade, they'll reform it for you. I know that other manufacturers, Ferrum does that. Other manufacturers do that as well. So that's another great option. But if you want to sharpen your knives at home, I'm going to show you a few options. First, I'm going to show you a pull-through sharpener. Now this is the easiest option, and this is the option that's probably the most right for most people. So you can see this sharpener has a coarse side and a fine side, and this sharpener is made for an Asian knife. So there's a difference in the angle that Asian knives and European knives are ground to. So Asian knives are typically ground to a 15-degree angle. So the point of this knife is actually beveled at a 15-degree angle. On a German knife, you'll see a more of a 20-degree angle, so it's a broader wedge. So you'll want to make sure you buy a sharpener to match the knives that you have. If you have Asian knives, buy an Asian knife sharpener. If you have European knives, buy a European knife sharpener. So this is super easy. There's basically no learning curve here. You just put your knife in the coarse slot first, and with a little bit of pressure, just drag it back a few times, and then you switch to the fine side, and the fine side is going to give you a little bit more of a polished edge. And that's really it. That's all you have to do. So the advantage of this type of sharpener is that they require very little learning curve. They're very, very easy to use. And for most people, that's probably why this is the best choice for home sharpening. The disadvantage is that if you're really a hardcore knife enthusiast and you care very, very much about keeping the longevity of your knives, these remove a little bit more material. Because what you're actually doing is you're shaving away the metal to reform that perfect factory edge. So these actually remove a little bit more material than a whetstone, and they don't get quite as sharp as you can get with a good set of whetstones. If you want your knives truly, truly razor sharp as they can be, you're probably going to want to go for a whetstone. But the nice thing is, like I said, unlike those other forms of sharpening, there's really no learning curve. So the angle is already set for you. There's nothing that can go wrong here. As long as you hold your knife straight up and down and drag it through, you know that the angle is going to be correct. All right, so the next option that I want to cover is an electric pull-through sharpener. So this is going to work pretty much the same way as a manual pull-through sharpener, but it's going to be a lot quicker because it's actually using spinning abrasive wheels rather than just static abrasive V shape like you see in the manual pull-through sharpener. So particularly if you're starting with really dull knives, this is going to get you sharp a lot quicker. And the nice thing about this particular model is it actually has a slot for European knives and a slot for Asian knives. So no matter what kind of knives you have, or if you have a mix of them, this sharpener is going to be perfect for you. You just select the slot that's correct. So what we're going to do, we're going to turn it on so you can hear it humming, and that's those wheels spinning. And you're just going to lay your blade in the slot and drag it through a few times. We're going to go on each side. Okay, and so that's how you use an electric pull-through sharpener. So pretty much the same as a manual pull-through sharpener, just a little bit quicker. The option that I want to talk about for sharpening is my personal favorite option, and that's a whetstone. So this is the traditional way to sharpen a knife. This is the way that knives have been sharpened for probably thousands of years. And in my opinion, it's still the best way to get a absolutely razor sharp edge if you're willing to put in the time. So I have this sharpener by Wusthof. This is my personal sharpener. We sell it here at the Cook's Warehouse. I particularly love this model. So I have my stone has been soaking here in a bowl of water for a little while. So you want to soak it for 15 or 20 minutes before you start on this. And that's just to get this saturated. So this is a very porous material. And you'll see when you first put it in water, it'll actually fizz for a while. That's all the air bubbles leaving the pores of this material. So once it's fully saturated, you're ready to start sharpening. So this has a coarse side, which is a 400 grit, a medium side, which is 1,000 grit, and a fine side that I believe is a 4,000 grit. So you're gonna start, if you have a really dull knife, you're gonna wanna start on the coarse side. This knife is not super dull, so I'm actually gonna start on the medium side and move to the fine side. Okay, so we're gonna lay it in our tray here that's gonna hold it nice and steady for us. And when you're doing whetstone sharpening, the key really is the angle. It's really something that you just have to learn. But fortunately, we actually have a really cool training tool that I'm gonna show you. So this is a little squirt bottle that comes with this whetstone. You wanna keep the stone really nicely wet and saturated throughout this whole process. And I'm gonna show you my secret weapon here. So these are angle guides. We sell these here at Cook's Warehouse. These are $14. These are by MinoSharp, and these are amazing. So what these do is this actually clips onto the spine of your knife. And what this is gonna do is it's actually gonna ensure that your angle is perfectly correct. So there's no guesswork at all. So these are excellent, especially when you're learning. On your first few times whetstone sharpening, it's gonna feel very uncomfortable getting that angle just right. This is gonna hold your blade at that perfect 15-degree angle to get the type of bevel that you want. I've done this enough times that I don't need an angle guide anymore, but I use this angle guide religiously when I was first learning how to sharpen. So these are an excellent tool. So I'm going to show you how to whetstone sharpen here. So our stone is nice and wet. We're going to hold it at that perfect 15-degree angle. We're going to put our fingers towards the sharp part of the blade, just so that we know it's laying perfectly flush with the blade, with the stone. And we're just going to go back and forth. And we're going to kind of move the knife in and out as we do that, just so that we get the full length of the blade. And we're going to keep doing that about maybe 15 or 20 passes. And what we're looking for is we want to start to feel a burr forming. And so a burr is where the sharp part of the edge actually starts to curl over. And you'll be able to feel it with your fingers if you know what you're feeling for. Okay? So what we're gonna do, we're gonna feel along this edge, and I can actually feel that burr forming. So I can feel a little bit of a burr there. So that tells us we need to flip over and go to the other side. There's different techniques that you can do. So if you wanna go straight back and forth like this, that's also perfectly fine. And some people find that that's a little bit easier for them to get full coverage of the blade. I like to do this because it gives me a little bit fuller range of motion, so I'm getting more of the sharp edge of the blade. Whatever's comfortable for you. So once we've got that burr established, what we're gonna do is we're gonna flip over to the other side. I like to switch the handle to my left hand. I'm fairly ambidextrous, so this is okay for me. But if you wanna go back towards you like this, that's also okay. So I'm gonna wet my stone again. And we're just gonna do that same thing on the other side. So one thing I wanna point out, you start to see a little bit of gray residue forming on your stone. What that actually is it's actually the metal from your knife that's being abraded away. And you wanna make sure you leave that on the stone, because it's actually gonna make the stone more abrasive, and it's actually gonna help you with your sharpening. So when you wipe your knife blade, you may see a little bit of gray, and that's normal, because that's the metal that's actually coming off of your knife. So I'm done with the medium side. I'm just gonna do one pass to kind of smooth that burr. Then I'm gonna switch to fine. We're gonna repeat that whole process on our fine stone. All right, so we've done about 15 or 20 passes on both of our stones on each side. So this knife should be pretty good and sharp now. So I'm gonna do another quick hone with our honing rod, and then I'm gonna test it. All right, so we're gonna get our paper here. We're gonna see how easily we can cut. So you can see no more raggedy edges. The knife doesn't feel like it's hanging at all. So this is a very, very sharp knife. So that's a great sharpening job. So that's just a few of the ways to hone and sharpen your knives. Again, you want to make sure you keep them dry, never put them in the dishwasher, hone them after every use, and keep them sharpened at least a couple times a year, and your knives will serve you for many, many years to come.